it doesn't happen nearly as often as is suggested by anime. Generally, a Japanese student will only live alone if they are attending a prestigious high school that's far from their family's home. A student's school is not assigned based on their home's location, so many children face long daily commutes. Additionally, most Japanese high schools do not have dormitories, so it's possible that a student might need a place of their own. In contrast to reality, there are a surprisingly large number of anime teenagers who live alone, or who share a house with other minors. Sometimes, the student isn't even in high school. Raya Michiko is a middle school student who takes over her family's home after the death of her parents. As long as these anime teens can support themselves, it's not technically irresponsible to let them live alone, right? 14. Yumeduru Nozaki, Monthly Girls Nozaki-kun. Monthly Girls Nozaki-kun features Yumeduru Nozaki, a professional manga artist who lives on his own, despite also being a 17-year-old high school student. At first, Yumeduru's parents aren't exactly chill with the whole living alone thing, but he's able to convince them after he begins supporting himself with his manga earnings. 13. Yudo Amakawa, Omomori Himari. Yudo Amakawa of Omomori Himari is a 16-year-old boy who has been living alone for years. His parents died when he was little, and for some reason, no adult stepped in to take care of him. Instead, Yudo's high school-aged neighbor Rinko is tasked with raising the boy. On a more practical level, Yudo most likely lives alone, because it would be difficult to pull off a harem anime in a family home. It's hard to imagine what Yudo's parents would say if they walked in on a bunch of half-naked cat demons trying to make out with their son. 12. Taiga Kagame, Kuroko no Basket. Taiga Kagame of Kuroko no Basket is a high school student who lives alone in Japan while his father is off working in the USA. Originally, the two intended to live together, but his father couldn't escape his work obligations. As a result of having to constantly feed himself, Kagame develops exceptional cooking skills, which he uses to rescue his basketball team from their coach Riko's terrible food. 11. Rito Yuki, to Love Rue. 15-year-old Rito Yuki lives alone with his 11-year-old sister, but that's probably the least bizarre part of To Love Rue. The particularly naughty harem anime begins with an alien princess falling out of the ceiling. Soon after this, she decides that she wants to marry the hapless Rito, but she's forced to compete with hordes of other beautiful alien women who are equally smitten with him. If Rito's parents were actually around, instead of living elsewhere for work, their presence might get in the way of the never-ending sexy antics. That said, they do show up from time to check up on their kids. While Rito does live alone, he's not completely independent. 10. Shino Asada, Sword Art Online 2. Sword Art Online 2's Shino Asada lives on her own, so that she can be near her high school. While originally, Shino's school was very close to her home, a freak occurrence forced her to transfer to a school far from where her family lived. After Shino killed a bank robber to protect herself and her mother, she faced a lot of harassment regarding the incident when she returned to her original school. Unfortunately, the transfer fails to stop the bullying, and actually puts Shino in a dangerous situation. Once Shino begins living alone, she becomes an easy target for a violent criminal who has it out for her. 9. Raya Michiko, Gourmet Girl Graffiti. While one could reasonably argue that a high school student is capable of living alone, the same can't be said for kids in middle school. Raya Michiko of Gourmet Girl Graffiti was left in the care of her grandmother after her parents moved overseas for work. When her grandmother dies, she simply continues living on her own. Raya's grandmother taught her to cook, and Raya tries to make delicious meals for herself, but fails because her loneliness makes all food taste bad. However, after her younger cousin moves in, she is able to begin enjoying food again. While the younger cousin is great company, she's no replacement for an actual adult guardian. 8. Rei Kiriyama, March Comes in Like a Lion. March Comes in Like a Lion stars the young Rei Kiriyama, a professional shogi player who lives alone because his biological family is dead and his foster family is emotionally abusive. While he's able to support himself with his shogi earnings, Rei doesn't work especially hard to make his dwelling feel comfortable. His apartment is a bare-bones setup. There's a futon, a shogi board, a refrigerator, and not much else. At the beginning of the series, Rei is isolated and bitterly depressed. However, once he starts leaving his lonely apartment to spend time with other people, his mood begins to lighten. 7. Haruka Nanase, Free. Haruka Nanase, the protagonist of Free, live alone in a spacious, traditional home. Originally, Haruka's parents left him in the care of his grandmother, as he did not want to move to a new town with them. After Haruka's grandmother dies, he keeps on living alone, despite the fact that he's not legally an adult. The setup could potentially seem reasonable. Haruka's in his final year of high school, and will soon be 18, but the boy's self-care skills are questionable. His best friend, Makoto Tachibana, usually ends up taking care of him. 6. Seto Kaiba, Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Is known for having characters whose living situations are completely illogical, and the Kaiba family's setup is perhaps the most ridiculous of all. Seto Kaiba runs Kaiba Corp, a multi-million-dollar corporation that he tricked his adoptive father into handing over to him. Up until the elder Kaiba's death, the two treat each other like enemies rather than relatives. After his father dies due to card game-related complications, the 15-year-old Seto has no guardian of any kind. In fact, he actually raises his younger brother Makuba on his own. While it's totally unrealistic for a teenager to run a massive corporation, Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't remembered for featuring a believable, slice-of-life story. 5. Kusuya Rima Your Lie in April. Kusuya Rima of Your Lie in April is a middle school student who is left alone after his mother dies of a terminal illness. The tragedy leaves Kusuya noticeably depressed, which leads to him being isolated in the beginning of the series. Unlike a lot of teenagers who live by themselves, Kusuya actually does eventually find an adult to take care of him. After his mother's death, her best friend Hiroko went to great lengths to avoid Kusuya, as she believed it was best to give him space. However, she ends up becoming his parental stand-in, in a move that is shockingly refreshing for the genre. 4. Taigai Saka, Toradora. Taigai Saka of Toradora live on her own, because she doesn't get along with her parents. The family fights so viciously that Taiga's parents opt to drop a fortune on the protagonist's fancy apartment, rather than actually confront the problems they have with their child. Unlike many anime characters who live on their own, Taiga doesn't embrace her independence by developing cooking and cleaning skills. Instead, she eats nothing but convenience store food, and trashes her house to the point that the mountains of filth begin to give her allergies. For a while, Taiga holds it together with the help of her boyfriend Ryuji, but she ultimately works things out with her parents and moves back home. 3. Brock, Pokemon. It's pretty normal for children to live on their own in the world of Pokemon. The very premise of the show is that 10-year-olds regularly embark on multi-year journeys wherein they regularly encounter dangerous monsters. While the heroes of Pokemon are uniformly independent, most of them still have a family home to return to. Brock is the notable exception, as both his parents left when he was 15 years old to pursue their own Pokemon journeys. When this happened, Brock was left to take care of the family gym, as well as his 9 younger siblings. While Brock's parents do eventually return to lend the poor teen a hand, asking a 15-year-old to step up and become the head of a 10-person household is still pretty ridiculous. 2. Orihime Inoue, Bleach. Orihime Inoue of Bleach live apart from her parents, and for good reason. When she was 3 years old, her older brother kidnapped her in order to protect her from their abusive parents. After that, he looked after her, up until he died in a car accident when she was 12. Since the tragedy of her brother's death was a public spectacle, one might think that a social worker would step in to look out for the young Orihime, but instead she begins living on her own. Her aunt agrees to support her financially as long as she keeps her grades up, but a good parent provides more than just financial support. 1. Naruto Uzumaki, Naruto. One of the most disturbing things about Naruto is the village's utter lack of a system for taking care of orphan children. Naruto is 12 years old when the series starts, yet he lived completely on his own, as his parents died trying to save their village. Despite being the son of the village's former leader, Naruto has basically been on his own since he was an infant. Naruto's isolation is perpetuated by the village's fear of his hidden power. A nine-tailed fox beast is sealed within his body, and there's no telling when it might choose to re-emerge and wreak havoc on the town. However, Naruto is far from the only child who lives alone, which suggests that the society lacks any sort of foster care system. After an adolescent Sasuke's entire clan is slaughtered, he ends up living alone on his family's estate, as none of the village's adults even consider adopting him.